Hey, this is Mike from the Run Testers, and in this video we are going to be talking our multi-tester review of the Polar Ignite 3. This is Polar's first watch with an AMOLED display. Now we're going to give you a quick breakdown of the key running focus features on this watch. If you want a detailed or more detailed breakdown, go check out our first run video. Then myself, Nick and Kieran will give you our big likes and dislikes with this watch, and then get into our verdict on whether the Polar Ignite 3 is a good option for runners. So let's get into it. The Polar Ignite 3 is Polar's first watch with an AMOLED display, and that new screen sees the price jump to £289 in the UK and $329.95 in the US. Features wise, it has the same multi-sports tracking support as Ignite 2, including outdoor and treadmill running modes, offering up modes like training suggestions, training at race pace, an interval timer, and it now includes a back to start navigation feature. The headline running feature here is the introduction of dual frequency GPS, joining the likes of Garmin, Apple and Coros in promising improved GPS accuracy near tall buildings and heavily wooded areas. Polar is introducing a new voice guidance feature to offer audio feedback on progress during runs, and is bolstering its sleep tracking skills with the ability to tell you how sleep can impact on your readiness throughout the day. There's also a new sleep gate feature which will advise when to go to bed based on other collated data after 7 nights of sleep. Battery life is the same 5 days promised as the Ignite 2, with a jump from 22 hours to 30 hours of GPS battery life. There's also a power saving mode which pushes that number up to 100 hours, but heart tracking is disabled and GPS is recording at a lesser frequent rate in that mode.
So my likes with the Ignite 3 start with the design, which I do think is really nice. It's a very thin watch, very light, sits very nicely on the wrist, really sleek, and the screen is really impressive. It pops very nicely, it's very bright. It's a big step up on the previous versions of the Ignite, and that's in all conditions. I never found it a problem to read any of the information on the screen, whether it was out in bright sunlight or in the dark or anything like that. So that all works really well, and Polar's also improved the user interface on the watch. It's just a lot more fun to engage with, I'd say, with the widgets on the watch face, and then the ones you can swipe through that show you lots of nice weekly stats and things like the weather forecast and your cardio load and my very, very bad sleep. Judging by that, very poor. So yeah, that's all been a big improvement on the watch, and it makes it just more enjoyable to engage with. Some caveats we'll come on to on the dislike section. It's also, it is a full sports watch. You've got loads of sports modes, tracks everything, and I found actually on my runs the heart rate tracking was pretty good on the watch, the native heart rate tracking. Like throughout pretty much every run I went on, every time I looked down, it wasn't far off the reading from a chest strap that was being beamed to my other wrist. So, there were some hiccups here and there. And if you are going to go deep into the cardio load, training load stuff on the watch, you probably would still pair a chest strap to get the best information into it. But actually, I found the heart rate tracking was pretty good. And for casual sports use, it would certainly be good enough, I think. Some of the new sleep tracking features are also pretty good. Like Polar's always been really good on sleep tracking, and the little boost from sleep thing is quite interesting to look at. I wish it was kind of integrated onto the watch itself so you could see it, without having to open up the app. I think that would be more useful, and I think maybe over time it might become a bit less useful, because when your boosts are each day is pretty predictable. Like you have that morning and afternoon boost with the lull in the middle. But it's good to have your rhythm shown like that in the app, I think. And the little sleep gate, I think, is a handy prompt to get you to go to bed at a certain time, which I do try and do generally. And the last little note, for me, the slap for lap worked quite well. Actually, I quite enjoyed it. I did think it, given actually interacting with the watch in other ways, was quite hard. The slap for lap worked quite well for me, even when I was wearing gloves and it was raining. So that's good. I think Kieran had some problems with it, but it did work for me, and I quite liked it as a clever way to get around the fact that you only have one button, but people might still want to take laps.
So I think the first thing that I really like about the Polar Ignite 3 is the design. This is lightweight, it's compact, it's slick, it looks sleek on the wrist. I think that AMOLED display is bright, clean, crisp, clear, with vibrant colours. It's very easy to read in pretty much all lights I've found, and it's a real upgrade, I think, on past kind of Polar watches. This is by far the best screen that I've seen on a Polar watch. There's also some really kind of neat little touches, like the little widgets that are on the home screen that let you tap through and get straight through to more information, and the fact that you can customize those as well. Now, you've still got a little bit of a bezel around the edge on this, but it's nothing like some of the Hulk and Great bezels we've seen on some other watches. And I think that it's like an almost sort of close to kind of edge to edge. It's got that edge to edge feel about it, and that's really just something that I think makes it look much more pleasing on the eye. It's just a much better, nicer watch, more joyous to look at, let's put it that way. Now, for me, one of the other real strong points about the Ignite 3 and generally kind of Polar is its sort of suite of training insights, recovery insights, the sleep, the activity, that kind of whole holistic picture of your kind of fitness and health. And the Ignite 3 has many of those tools right here. Some of the key ones that I really like, the workout recommendations are handy for guidance and a bit of a nudge to keep your kind of training mix kind of correct. So you're doing different things, whether it's be sort of strength or balance or running and cardio. You can see very easily, whether or not you've been looking after all of those areas, which is really nice. And it will suggest workouts for you to have a crack at if you haven't. Fuel-wise, I think is a great tool, particularly if you're slightly uninitiated running, not too sure about how to put together a fueling strategy for a different kind of distance of a race. From a running perspective, going out to do a marathon, you can put in your time, expected time to run, your intensity, your distance, and it will spit out a fueling strategy plan to help sort of guide you. It'll then update that as you kind of run in real time based on your real time intensity. So it's very good actually just to give you a sort of bare bones plan. A follow on from that I really like is the energy sources breakdown. So now this will give you during a day the main energy source you're using, whether you've used mostly kind of fat or carbohydrates, and actually will give you a helicopter view of that over the week as well. So you can sort of see based on the intensity of your activity and what you've been doing, not only when you run, but beyond that, where your main fuel sources are coming from. Now, big caveat really is this is an estimate, obviously, it's not, the absolute law, but it's a good way just to get a nice overview of what you might be burning, maybe if you want to do something to try and adjust how you train and your lifestyle to change that up. It's a nice kind of insight in that sense. And then for me, finally, I think I'm a big fan of benchmarking fitness. We'll start of a new year here, want to know where we're at and where we're going to want to be by the end of the year. And the walking, running and general fitness tests on Polar are really super simple to do. And I think just dead handy for taking a snapshot of where you're at any given moment in time. And then the final thing for me is the weekly summary view, which shows you the intensity of the training that you've done, of the sessions that you've done by the week. So you can see if you spent a lot of time in which kind of heart rate intensity zones, and again, talking about that kind of training mix, some of us were very guilty of sort of doing too much in certain zones. We need to make sure we're hitting the right percentages in different zones to get the right training effect. And this is, again, it's just an at a glance view, very easy to see if you're getting nearer those or you've got an area which is really lacking. So yeah, something else that I really like. And again, the vibrant colours of the screen now actually really make all that data pop really nicely.
So the good first, and I would say in the Ignite 3, the first thing that stands out for me is that you do get a very nice, bright, vibrant AMOLED display here. Probably one of the better ones I've seen on a sports watch, on a smartwatch, and that I've tested so far. And that is definitely a positive for Polar on the Ignite 3. Visibility was very good, even kind of sunnier conditions as well, where typically AMOLED displays can kind of suffer. And I haven't really had any issues in terms of that ability to see this display indoors, outdoors, when I've been running with it. Now, that AMOLED display really lends itself to the next big thing, which I think is a positive here, and it's the improved UI. It's a user interface that definitely feels better suited to a touchscreen display, that slight improvement in terms of the performance you get here, and having that extra bit of color and kind of brightness and vibrancy in that display. You're getting kind of bigger widgets that kind of fill that screen. There's kind of added complications that you can have on the watch face as well. Those are all nicely optimized, I would say, for this kind of round AMOLED screen. And that is definitely a positive. I don't think it's perfect yet in terms of that UI, but I definitely think it's a step in the right direction for me. Now, the other thing I'd probably pick out on here is kind of delving into the kind of features that you're getting on the Ignite 3 that you didn't have on the Ignite 2. It's nice to see to have some elements of kind of a navigation feature in here. So you now get a back to start feature, which you don't have on the Ignite 2. And for me, that's normally enough for me in terms of kind of navigation features that I want. It's nice to have kind of the breadcrumb kind of trail navigation. Those full color maps that you get on kind of things like the Garmin Epics are great, but ultimately for a lot of the runs I do, just having something that can kind of guide me back if I've gone out exploring and not quite sure how to get back or which way I've gone. Having a back to start or a simple back to start feature is a nice feature to have. So for me, those are the kind of three key things that really stood out for me in my time with the Polar Ignite 3. You've got a really nice AMOLED display in here, and that is a welcome thing for Polar watches, and I hope that they continue to have a watch with an AMOLED display in its collection. You've got that improved UI as well, which hopefully will shape what we see on the other kind of Polar, more expensive Polar watches as well. And you've got some navigation features there as well, which puts it a bit more in line with things like the Garmin Venu 2, and just gives you some navigation or basic navigation features or support that you didn't have on the original Ignite 2 as well.
Okay, on to the dislikes. Top of the list for me is the GPS accuracy, which is just not accurate really at all. I think not only is this poor for a dual band GPS watch, it's one of the poorer watches I've tested on GPS accuracy for a while now. Like every single run, pretty much I noticed visible cut corners, just sections where the GPS had clearly dropped out and the watch had dived across like a bit of a river or a lake or something like that, and nearly always ended up with short distances as a result. I think it might be a problem actually with the GPS just dropping out entirely, because there are periods on runs where I do get quite a nice clear GPS path that's very close to the reading of an Apple Watch Ultra or the Garmin Epix 2, both of which have got exceptional dual band GPS tracking. But yeah, most runs something would annoy me about it, and certainly if I was going out to do a hard session and using the watch to pace it, I wouldn't be able to trust it. So I think pretty much any keen runner or cyclist is going to notice that GPS inaccuracy, and it probably will annoy them like it annoyed me, even if you're not as into GPS as I am. The battery life is also not great. Like I had it in always on mode and I was wearing it at the same time as the Apple Watch Ultra, and the Apple Watch Ultra was consistently outlasting the Ignite 3 when it had the always on screen on it. It's not even a particularly great always on screen, so you turn that off and go to race to wake, and you are getting, I found 3 or 4 days with hour run each day, so not brilliant, especially if you've got the always on turned off, but not far off that 5 days. With Polar in general, you do get a lot of battery drain overnight, and it is doing some impressive stuff with the sleep tracking, but maybe the option to turn that off would be a good idea, because some people might prefer to have battery life over the sleep tracking. Then I think probably the biggest problem I had was often just interacting with the watch, like the race to wake, swiping through the screens, pressing the button and waiting for the screen to come on, was always just not quite pinpoint, like sometimes quite severe lag, which is obviously very annoying, but even if it wasn't that severe, it would just always be a bit of a pain to get it to respond to my command, especially like if you're on the run. I found one thing that really starting the watch at the start of a run was hard, like tapping the screen furiously, very annoying. A GPS lock on takes on quite a long time as well. But yeah, there was one race where it just never managed to hit the screen in the right way to start the run, so I just didn't log it for the race. It was very annoying. But in general, yeah, it just takes a couple of swipes to get it going again, especially like if you're on a run, you've about 5 minutes, you haven't really looked at your watch, you look down, just never, ever just seemed to come on when I did that the first time, the race to wake. So I always had to do it a couple of times, press the button, something like that. So just all that is a little bit frustrating every time you kind of interact with the watch. Like swiping through the screens right now works quite well, but if I left the watch for a bit, tried to do it, just first few seconds would be that little bit of lag, and it's nothing terrible. Like you can, it's just annoying, and it shouldn't really be the case. They're meant to improve the processor in this, and it's just, consistent little annoyances add up over time to your experience with the watch. And the last quick thing, the strap is horrible. The one it's packaged with, it's just really unpleasant on the skin. Like I found it very hard to tighten the strap correctly. Just because it would just pull against my arm hairs, or even just against the skin on my arm, because my underarms aren't that hairy, and it would just ram against that in an unpleasant way. So you can replace the strap quite easily from Polar for a nylon one or something like that, but I don't really know how they can end up with such an unpleasant strap in the box, because it is not fun to wear it. Like every time I do it up, it would annoy me.
First up on those things that I wasn't so sure about then, battery life was a bit of an issue for me, particularly when you look at how this watch performs up against some of the other watches now that it comes in at a higher price. We're talking about things like the Coros Pace 2 or the Garmin Forerunner 255, and even Polar's own Pacer Pro. Now in my tests, I didn't really even get close to the listed battery life, even when I had the always on screen switched off. So on average, you were looking at kind of 4 to 5 days usage, and that was with kind of around 5 to 6 hours of GPS tracking. Now, one of the areas where you see a lot of battery drain on Polar watches, and this is also true of the Ignite 3, is overnight. I was seeing kind of between 5 and 10% drop off. Now you're obviously getting a lot of information based around kind of the sleep tracking. You've got the nightly recharge and the recovery recommendations all wrapped up into wearing it overnight, but you will see a rather large kind of drop off in the battery life as a result of all of those features running and tracking continuously through the night. But probably the biggest issue for me was that an hour GPS runtime with the full accuracy on, making use of that kind of dual frequency max accuracy GPS, would burn through around 10%. I also did a 3-hour 15 marathon test that burnt through 20%. So neither of those stats suggest that you're going to get near the 30 hours GPS runtime that the listed time suggests if you're using the max accuracy at least. It's going to be more like 15 to 20 hours. And what's crucially important about that is that brings this watch from 30 hours at a sort of slightly higher price tag back down into the ballpark of things like the Garmin Forerunner 255 on its overall kind of GPS runtime longevity. As with battery life, so with GPS. The GPS for me, even though it's got that dual frequency, didn't seem to be on point. I put it up against the Garmin Enduro 2 in max accuracy mode and also in some sort of lower accuracy modes. And the Polar Ignite 3 often came up sort of quite significantly short in terms of GPS. When you dive into the tracks, you can also see the Polar Ignite 3 sort of cutting off, going through rivers, cutting through buildings, all of those things. And I just don't think that the dual frequency It's basically adding the accuracy levels that you would expect. Now, heart rate was another area where I sort of found it lacking. In my tests, it was often wayward compared to the Garmin HRM Pro chest strap or even the Polar H10. 2 examples here. I did a warm-up followed by an all-out 5K with a warm down. And you can see quite clearly here where the Ignite 3 is struggling kind of in that kind of warm-up section. It kind of levels out towards the end during the kind of the harder part of it when I was running a bigger intensity, but it struggled before. Over a marathon distance where I ran at a steady pace, the Ignite's optical heart rate had these kind of quite big spikes, and at times it was taking me really close to my kind of max HR, my max heart rate, even like up to 180 beats. And I knew from my feel on the run that wasn't the case. I was running pretty steady around a track actually. I did 15.5 miles in the middle of a marathon around a 400-meter track, and I was running at a very, very even pace throughout all of that. So where the Polar Ignite 3 seems to suggest there's some intensity shifts here, that wasn't what was happening in reality on the track. So one final area where I was a bit let down, the screen is brilliantly bright, looks brilliant, but actually when it comes to the kind of the touch screen interface in the wet, I did that big long marathon, it was a really, really soggy, damp day, running around the track. I found the touchscreen really hard to use when it gets wet basically, and the problem with that is that you've only got one button as an alternative control. You don't have the option of going to the buttons. The other thing I think that the user interface on this is still quite laggy, so things like when you raise to wake, things like when you tap initially to wake it up, it doesn't always respond first time. It's just a little bit frustrating. It's just not slick and smooth and on point, particularly when you're running and you're like, I want to know what my stats are right now. I need the raise to wake to work, or I need to be able to tap it to see. One final quick thing that I really didn't like was this strap. Horrible to wear. You basically have to tuck the tail in, and that bit goes around your wrist and it pinches all your skin, pulls all your hair out. It's a really uncomfortable strap to wear. You can swap them out and get different straps, and I would recommend you do it.
So into the bad on the Ignite 3, and unfortunately there is quite a lot of bad for me on this watch. The first thing I will talk about is the screen durability. Now, one of the things that Polar highlights on the Ignite 3 from the Ignite 2 is that it's added Gorilla Glass. Now that is designed to to protect the screen against scratches better than it would do on the Ignite 2 in terms of the screen tech and the screen use on that watch. Now, I haven't used this watch rigorously. I've run with it outdoors, indoors. I've done some kind of gym workouts. I've swum with it as well. And in that time, when I say not very rigorous, I would say use, the way I would test other watches as well, I've already got a massive big scratch across the screen, and it's not gone away. You know, it's one of those ones where I thought maybe it was smudged a little bit, but it's all the way across the screen. So for me, there is a durability issue, or question marks over the durability of the screen. The other thing for me is the kind of promised performance improvements from the Ignite 2. Now Polar is saying here you've got improved CPU speed, there's more RAM here to enable this Polar watch to run more smoothly. Ultimately, that is not what I've seen. I think it's very inconsistent in terms of those improvements. I think generally you can swipe through screens and it can be okay. You can press that physical button and it's very slow to react. And you know, when those things all combine, it can be a very frustrating experience. And ultimately, it's not quite there for me, and it's enough to kind of grate and irritate me over time when I've been using it. So from a performance point of view, it's not really there, and ultimately it's still offering that kind of laggy, labouring kind of feel in, you know, elements of interacting with this display. Now, another thing I didn't absolutely love was the application of the dual band GPS mode on this watch. Now, this is the first Polar to use dual band GPS. It's not the first watch or sports watch to offer it. I think the kind of notable kind of standouts in terms of that support have been from Apple, Garmin, and from Amazfit, I would say. Now, in terms of Polar's execution of that dual band support, I would say it would definitely fall in the kind of bad examples of it. I don't think it's the worst I've used, but it's definitely, I haven't seen the massive improvements from using the Ignite 2 in terms of that GPS performance. I know you kind of look at the routes side by side, and I kind of used it against a Garmin in multi-band modes. The routes generally, or the data generally matches up, but when you look and delve deeper into those routes, you don't quite see the mirroring of that data ultimately. And you know, as I said, I don't think it's massively different from the experience I had with the Ignite 2. And another thing that I have noticed and hasn't gone away is when the battery drops to a certain point, so around 10% or just below 10%, it won't let you track. Unlike If you're grabbing a Garmin, you get to that point, it will still try and track your run and will save whatever it can from that run. On the Polar, it just doesn't let you track that run when it drops a certain level of battery life. Last thing to mention is the strap. I mean, we're all going to mention it, I think, but the strap, it's changed from the Ignite 2, and I don't know why, because ultimately it's a lot worse. I find it more uncomfortable to wear. When you're wearing this watch really tight, it can feel tight. If I've taken it off in the cold and I've tried to put it back on, it's really difficult to use this clasp that a mechanism that Polar has introduced here. It's not a good strap, and it's not a good decision, I think, to change that strap.
So my verdict on the Ignite 3 is that it's really quite close to being a very, very good watch. Like, I think it's a really attractive design. The screen is very nice. The user interface is now really good, and it's got all the sports tracking stuff on it. It's got, you know, pretty impressive feature set for a watch at its price. You think about things like the cardio load management you're getting, all the different sports modes, all the customization you can do there, and it just doesn't quite nail it. Doesn't quite stick the landing, because actually interacting with the watch is often a bit of a pain. The GPS accuracy is horrible, which does kill it off, I think, for lots of runners. But even if you're just using it for general sports tracking, I think the overall software experience might annoy you a little bit because of that lag and just little things that add up and make it a little bit frustrating to use. And it's not like a nightmare to use or anything like that, but when there's a really clear, I think, competitor like the Garmin Venu 2 out there that does pretty much all the same things, but is very snappy and responsive and easy to use and has music storage and GPS accuracy is better even without dual band GPS, I think that would be the one I'd go for. I know the Garmin Venu is a bit more pricey on RRP, but it's often around the same price in sales and that kind of thing. And certainly if you're looking for a more serious running watch, I'd be looking elsewhere in the Polar range, like the Pacer Pro, or one of the cheaper forerunners, just because you're going to get that more accurate experience. So yeah, it's pretty good. It's a very well-rounded watch in that it looks good, it does a lot of sports tracking, it does a lot of activity and sleep tracking quite well, but like lots of little minor annoyances with it add up to make the experience of using it a little bit frustrating for me at times. And then there's the fact that I just don't rate the GPS accuracy at all.
So my verdict on the Polar Ignite 3 then, well, this is a good watch on many fronts, I think. You know, you've got that much improved screen. I think you've got the brilliant array of kind of Polar's training, fitness and recovery insights, sleep, that kind of holistic kind of fitness and health picture that Polar, I think, excels at in terms of its overall kind of features. That's all here. It's a nice looking watch. It's lightweight, it's compact, it's let down a little bit by that strap, which is annoying. But overall, I think on the wrist, this is a pretty good, solid watch. However, that price hike has put it up against some really stiff competition. And on some of the basics that you'd want it to perform at when you're talking about those kind of prices, I think this just doesn't quite hit the mark. The battery life is a bit lacking. The optical heart rate performance was a bit hit and miss. And for me, the GPS failed to deliver the improvements that you'd expect from that dual frequency accuracy. And you're paying a bit of a price in terms of the overall battery life for accessing that dual frequency as well. And I think the one criticism I'd level at it, I think it's lost some of the Ignite's original kind of appeal at a price point that was kind of below £200 as a watch that I think initially was designed to appeal to kind of entry level. You could recommend it as a good sort of wallet-friendly entry-level running watch that did quite a lot for the money. I think at the price point it's kind of lost a lot of that, even though it has added on features and the dual frequency, and it's got that long, arguably longer battery life, and the design's been upgraded a bit in the AMOLED screen. But I don't think it's gone far enough. It's not good enough. And actually, yeah, I just would have rather kept some of the basics really good and kept the price down, and then you'd be able to recommend it. As it stands, I don't think it's doing enough to be better than the Garmin Forerunner 255 as a running watch. I don't think it's better than the Coros Pace 2. I'm not even sure that I would recommend this over Polar's own Polar Pace Pro. So for me, some improvements, some good things, but some important misses, and overall I just think there are better watches out there.
Okay, so my verdict on the Polar Ignite 3, and I think ultimately this is a massively missed opportunity for Polar. I think on paper, even though it's more expensive than Ignite 2, ultimately AMOLED displays obviously add a little bit more in terms of that price. It could have been a great watch, but there's massive issues with it, and there were reasons why I was quite happy to take it off in the end. There's that durability kind of question marks over the screen, ultimately, as I've explained. I think those kind of promised performance improvements aren't quite there either. I still think the interface needs a little bit of work or a little bit of tweaking, though it has made some improvements on that front. Things like that dual band GPS mode that you're getting here, I haven't really seen the big gains in terms of that performance as well from a kind of GPS point of view. And then there's some familiar issues here, that kind of battery drain when you're kind of overnight and you're tracking sleep and you can't disable those features. And then also you're getting that kind of always on display battery life, which is, you know, significantly less than what you'd find on an Apple Watch, and I think on the Garmin Venu 2. Now, ultimately, I wouldn't pick this over the Garmin Venu 2, which is the clear alternative to this watch. You can pick it up for cheaper than the Polar Ignite 3. Again, I mentioned the Apple Watch SE. I think you're getting that Apple core run tracking experience. You're maybe getting, you know, similar in terms of that battery life, but I think ultimately the experience will be a lot better overall. So yeah, I think a massive missed opportunity for Polar with the Ignite 3. It could have been a great running watch, one that I was hoping to really like, but ultimately it fails in too many departments for me to ultimately recommend it as it stands. Okay, so that is our take on the Polar Ignite 3. Now, if you've got any questions about this watch, let us know in the comments. As always, like and subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos. And yeah, we'll see you for next Run Testers video.